Hello everyone, so this is UPSC History Optional Paper 1, Topic 1, Sources, and this is the fourth part. So you people will be like, sir, will you be like only making top means notes on or videos on sources only? I have already told you this is very big, but yes, right now this is the last part which I'm making, that is part 4. After that, we'll move on to other portions. What does it mean? It means that we will cover prehistory, protohistory, IVC, megalithic, all these things. And again, you will see prehistory, protohistory is small, not small per se as syllabus. That is one of the biggest portion, Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic, and all those things. But questions have been asked less. So that will be done in a faster manner. IVC is again big. So we have to talk about various questions which UPSC has asked and how you have to write answers, right? So again, we'll go to other areas. Sorry for that. Just give me a second. So yes, we'll go to other areas, we'll cover these, and then again, we'll come back to sources and we'll do some more questions, because even if I tell you and we'll discuss some more questions on sources, which has relation to other topics, you won't understand anything. So let's do other topics first, and then we'll come back and we can cover other portion of sources if there is any, or if there are good questions on sources which are remaining, we will discuss that. So this is the last part of sources. Right now, we'll go to in the next video on history optional, we'll go to prehistory and protohistory. Okay, let's not waste time. Let's start. And because we have a lot of things to cover, man. When I make slides and all these things, I realize there are so many things to tell you people. So literary sources. We have done archaeological sources, epigraphy, numismatics. Now we are here. How far can the ancient Indian Sruti literature be used as historical sources? So this is the question. I've shown you this question in the previous part, but we have not discussed anything related to this question. We were just talking about the basics, like what is Shruti, Vedas, then what are different parts of Vedas. Then there were different schools based on whether they accepted Vedas or not, Astic and Nastic school. So many things we have discussed, but we have not discussed this question. So see what happens now. Let's say they ask you this particular question in exam and you don't have any idea about this question, what they're asking. You will start saying all those things which we have discussed in the previous part. If you write those things that Vedas are 4 parts. There are 4 types of Vedas. And you started talking about Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, Upanishad. And then you Astic and Nastic school, Ajivika, Charvaka. It doesn't make any sense. They will not give you any marks. You have to talk about what they're asking in this question. So again, how you can start this question, how you can write this question, how you will frame your answer. So you have 15, it is a 15 marker. So that means ideally you should take 10 minutes, right, for writing this answer. So first of all, how you will start? You will start with what is Shruti? What is the literal meaning of Shruti? What is the literal meaning of Shruti? The literal meaning of Shruti is that which has been heard. And 4 Vedas, they have the status of Shruti. So you can start like this. You can just, in Hindu tradition, you can say 4 Vedas, they have the status of Shruti. Now, the first heading. What will be the first heading? They are asking whether or not we can use Shruti literature as historical sources. If we can use it, how? If we cannot use it, then what are the issues plaguing it or plaguing Shruti literature? So first topic which you can give is issues in using Shruti literature, issues in using Shruti literature as historical sources, in using Shruti literature as historical sources. So what are the issues? What problems you can face if you're using Shruti literature as historical sources? So you can give one bracket, and do give bracket like this, so that when you underline stuff, now if you just underline this heading, then there will be no difference between your heading and your underlined stuff. So you have to make it separate from your underlined sentences. So write it in blocks. So this is your first heading. First heading. So what do you think are the issues? What are the issues in using Shruti literature as historical sources? So one thing is these literature, these Vedas, they have the status of Shruti literature, and they're religious literature, man. It's not like they're talking about, or they're secular, they're talking about society per se. No, they are religious literature, and references to historical events are very few. So they are religious literature and references to historical events are very few. And actually they are part of Brahmanical tradition, part of these Shrutis, they are part of Brahmanical tradition. Now, what is Brahmanical tradition? Let's try to understand it. That will help you in understanding other parts also. What other parts? So let's say if you again keep on seeing the syllabus, if you see Aryans and Vedic period, when we'll go here now, most of the things we will already be doing today in our question. So when we read Aryans and Vedic period, the things will become much more easier for us. So that is the beauty of this particular topic, that is sources. So what we are trying to talk about, this question, how far it can be used. So it is a part of Brahmanical tradition, this Vedic literature. Now what happened? We all know there are 4 caste system, right? 4 caste, they're part of the caste system, that is Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. But the first reference first reference of this caste system, where are you witnessing it? First reference of this caste system, you are witnessing it in Vedas. And which Veda? What we have discussed. Every Veda has four parts. So there are Rig Veda, and Rig Veda also has four parts: Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, Upanishad. This we have discussed in the previous part, that is part 3. So in Rig Vedic Samhita, you find the first reference of caste system. And in that Rig Vedic Samhita also, there is a hymn which is known as Purusha Shukta hymn. Purusha Shukta hymn of Rig Vedic Samhita. It talks about four caste system. But there, what are the castes they talk about? Brahman, Rajanya. Instead of Kshatriya, they have written Rajanya, then Vaishya, and then Shudra. So here, generally Vedas, they are representing the first part, like Brahmanas, they're reflecting them more. It is said that whoever has written these Vedas, majorly they belong to the Brahmana culture. They were part of the Brahmanical tradition. So that's what they are trying to say. And it reflects the religious beliefs, practices, and points of view of the Brahmanas. So this is one issue, that how can we talk about other people? Like, there is issue there, right? You're not very sure whether you can, or whether they are talking about Shudras, Vaishyas, Rajanya in the same manner as they're talking about Brahmanas and their tradition. So this is the first part. The second thing is, it may not, as we have discussed, second point which you can talk about here, issues, may not necessarily represent popular ideas or practices, may not necessarily, because we know it's talking about one particular group more than others. So it may not necessarily represent. And because of this Brahmanical supremacy, which happened during that particular period, which we will read later on as well in other topics, Buddhism, Jainism, they came into picture because they realized that Brahmanas, when you need any sacrifices, rituals, you need to call these Brahmanas. And so Brahmanas were gaining supremacy, other castes were going down. They did not like it, nobody will like it. So there was a reaction which came in the form of these heterodox sects, like the sects which form part of Gnostic school. We have talked about it in part 3. May not necessarily, and again, we'll keep on talking about it, man. These things will keep on coming again and again. That's why I'm saying it again and again. I may feel like an idiot, but you have to read sources very minutely. So second part, may not necessarily represent popular ideas or practices. Then the third issue is dating the Vedas, or dating the Rig Veda per se. Dating the Rig Veda per se means we don't know when this book was compiled. So initially it was compiled orally because the people did not know how to write. So there are various debates. Some people says that Rig Veda, which is the oldest Veda, it was compiled between 6000 to 1000 BCE. But now most of the people believe that no, 6000 to 1000 BCE is too big a period. So generally these books, there's a consensus now. What is the consensus? What does it say? That, let me show you something. So this guy here, Max Mueller, you will read about him a lot when you're reading ancient history, and we'll see why. So we have seen the third point, dating the Rig Veda, that is an issue here. So some sources say 6000 to 1000 BC, between this Rig Veda was written. But now most of the historians, they agree that between 1500 to 1000 BC, between 1500 to 1000 BCE, early Vedic literature were written. Now this is a tricky portion, early Vedic literature. So go back again. So this period, you see, 1500 to 1000, make it 1000 here. Now the consensus is it is 1000. So 1500 to 1000 BC, this is called early Vedic period, initially when the Aryans were coming to Indian subcontinent. So in this period, early Vedic literature was written, it is believed. And later Vedic literature, they were written in 1000 to 500 BC. Later Vedic literature, they were written in 1000 to 500 BC. That is the basic belief. And how do we know this? This we know via the study of Max Mueller. Max Mueller, sir, he was a German scholar and he deduced it. He was very much interested about Indian culture. That's why even when you read IR in GS paper 2 now, you have to talk about this guy, Max Mueller. He's acting as a link between India and Germany, right? Cultural links. So this is what they are saying. And what are the books which you can keep in early Vedic literature and later Vedic literature? See, remember, there are 4 Vedas. Each Veda has 4 parts. So that means all in all, you have 16 parts. It is said that only one of these parts is part of early Vedic literature. That is Rig Vedic Samhita. Rig Vedic Samhita is the only part which was written in, or which is a part of early Vedic literature. Rest 15, they are part of later Vedic literature. So keep that point in mind. This is a very interesting point actually. So yes, so this is the part which we are talking about. Now, Max Mueller, and he was an Orientalist, we'll talk about Orientalist, Anglicist. If you have read modern history, you will know the debate. Orientalist people, they were very much interested about our culture, Far East and all those concepts. So he was an Orientalist. He was very much interested in our culture. Why we are saying East, like Orientalist means Far East, because if you see, he was a German scholar. For Germany, for European guys, we are in the East portion. So that's why they say East. So right now also there's one very thing, like cute thing which happens. We keep on saying, let's say Saudi Arabia and all those countries. So that is what? That is West Asia. Na? But there are so many people who will say that Middle East, that Saudi Arabia is a part of Middle East. It is not Middle East for us, sir. For US and all those guys, it is Middle East. For us, it is West Asia, Western Asia. So don't say Middle East. It's stupid. If we say Saudi Arabia is a part of Middle East, that is stupid. If American guys are saying this, that is fine for them. But for us, it is West. So please say Western Asia rather than Middle East. So here, for these guys, for Max Mueller, we were on the East side. So Orientalist means study of the Eastern culture. So he was an Orientalist. He had a great interest in studying our culture. So we are talking about issues in using Vedas as the source of, or as historical source. Let's go back. So 3 issues we have seen. What else? What is other issue? The issue is there. The 4th issue which you can talk about is problems in correlating evidence from Vedas with archaeology. Means the meaning here is sometimes Vedas says something, but archaeological sources, they say something else entirely. So correlating evidence. So it's not like whatever is written there, you will believe it without juxtaposing or without corroborating with sources. Sometimes there is problem in correlating evidence from what? From Vedas with archaeological. So archaeology. So sometimes they do not match. So keep this particular point in mind. So these are some issues. Now, what can be the other heading? What are the other things which you will talk about? The other heading here will be extent up to which. So we are talking about this question. Don't just focus on, like, you have to know the dimensions, man. If you don't know the dimensions, the issues, like, you will not get good marks. So the second part, like extent, and what can be the heading? Extent up to which Shruti literature can be used as historical sources. So this will be the heading, you can use it. So now second part, you're saying that first part you showed the issues. Okay, what are the problems which can arise? Now here in the second part, we're talking about if we have to use it, or if we are using it, how we can use it. So what are the points which you can talk about? So first thing is, it can be used as a source of history where they are composed. Like we have just discussed now, early Vedic literature, they were composed in early Vedic period. So it is said that Rig Vedic Samhita, we're talking about the first point. So the first point is it can be used as source of history, For part, I will show you the handwritten notes as well. So don't worry about it. Can be used as source of history for the areas in which they were composed. So let's say Rig Vedic Samhita. It is a part of early Vedic literature. We have just discussed there are 16 parts of 4 Vedas in which they are composed, of which they were composed. Let's say they were composed. So Rig Vedic Samhita, it is a part of early Vedic literature. It was composed during the early Vedic period. And this Rig Vedic Samhita, it was composed, this land where early Vedic people were residing, it was known as Sapt Sindhu. Sapt means 7. Sapt Sindhu means land surrounded by 7 rivers. And what are those 7 rivers? Indus and its 5 tributaries that you also have studied in geography, Ravi, Vyas, Satluj and all those. Jhelum, Chenab. So in this water treaty, read it. It will help you in your international relation topic. So Sapt Sindhu is Indus 5 tributaries. Then the last river, 7th river is Saraswati, which has dried down now and we are searching it. It is also known as Ghaggar Hakara. So Saraswati is the 7th river, which you have to keep in mind. So if you're reading, let's say, Rig Vedic Samhita, so in that scenario, what you have to understand here is that Rig Vedic Samhita will tell you more about the early Vedic period. Now, later Vedic text, the 15 other parts of 4 Vedas, they are composed in Indo-Gangetic plain. What happened? Initially, they were residing in this particular area. Then they came down when they realized that the land was more fertile in the Magadha area. So they came down to the Indo-Gangetic plain and Upper Ganga Valley. So here the other text, other 15 parts of 4 Vedas were compiled. So those later Vedic texts can tell you more about this later Vedic period. So this is the first part. how, up to which extent it can be used as historical source. Second part is Battle of 10 Kings. This Rig Veda, it talks about Battle of 10 Kings. And according to archaeology also, we know we have to corroborate it with archaeological sources. So according to archaeology also, it may have happened. I've just shown you to see this Battle of 10 Kings. So it is believed that this happened on Ravi River, which at that time was known as Parushni. So Battle of 10 Kings may be based on actual historical incident. And this was a great battle actually, which took place on the banks of river Parushni. One person against various tribes, and that one person won. So if you want to read about Battle of 10 Kings, although you don't need to know that deep into detail, we are already going too deep. And there are also references which shows that, and which, like in these Shruti literature, in the Vedas, they talk about political alliances between tribes and how they were fluid and shifting. Like there was no permanent friend and permanent enemy. That is true in current international relation also. And that was the same thing which was happening during this period also. So all these things which they are talking about, they have some truth in it. So you can talk about that. So in those areas, you can use Shruti as historical source. What else, Saran ma'am? What else you can talk about? So there are references of things like Sabha and Samiti. These literature, these Vedas, Shruti literature, they talk about Sabha and Samiti, which indeed happened. So Sabha was like, at this time, when we are talking about Vedas, and when we'll talk about Vedas in detail, when we are doing which topic 5, then we'll talk about this in detail. So you will hear that initially in the early Vedic period, the concept of like kingdoms, etc. was missing. Kingdoms, etc. happened during what? Second Mahajanpada or second urbanization, or 16 Mahajanpadas, that happened during 6th century BC. We are talking about 1500 period. So that at that time, they were basically small tribes, and they were leaders of tribe in early Vedic period. In early Vedic period, they were fighting battles over cattle. Later on, land became much more important. Initially, cattle was the most prized possession. So there are references of Sabha and Samiti. So Sabha was smaller elite gathering. Sabha is smaller, Samiti is bigger, and Samiti is larger assembly. So at that time, there was a head of these tribes who was known as Rajan, which later on became Raja. So he was the chieftain. All these references are there, which is actually true because it has been talked about by other sources as well. So you know about Sabha and Samiti from these Shruti sources only, right? Vedic period, Sabha and Samiti. So these things we are knowing about these assemblies from these Shruti literature. So references of assembly like Sabha, which is a smaller elite gathering means Rajan and some of his closest friends or relatives or keen. And then Samiti is a larger assembly who generally used to elect the Rajan. So presided over by Rajan. So this point also we are getting from Vedic sources, Shruti sources. What else? Fourth point. So fourth point which you can talk about is, so you can see here, and we are talking about extent up to which Shruti literature can be used as historical sources. So there's a point where Rig Vedic Samhita, it is the most important source because this is the only source of early Vedic period. And this thing you will hear again and again and again in Aryan and Vedic literature, means Aryan Vedic topic 5, which we are discussing, or which we will discuss later on. So the fourth point is how you can use it as literary sources. Rig Vedic Samhita, it reflects a situation where the social status was not as rigidly defined. And this is not told by me, this is told by Upinder Singh ma'am. This ma'am here is Upinder Singh. She's the daughter of our former PM Manmohan Singh sir. Very good book. Her book is known as A History of Ancient and Early Medieval India. You can have a look at it, although I'm covering things from it. But that is a good book for, even after watching these videos, you can have a look at it. So she was saying that in early Vedic period, the status of women was much better. All in all, this caste system was not very rigidly defined. So everything was good. But the social status, it deteriorated. In later Vedic text, it indicates the beginning of a class structure, and in which different social groups, they had different degree of access to productive resources. So she has also talked about subordination of women and all those things. So yes, you can use Shruti literature to corroborate, like let's say in early Vedic period, Rig Vedic Samhita, what is it saying about women? Then later Vedic text, 15 parts of 5 Vedas, what are they saying about women? That can give you an idea. When you're comparing it, that can give you an idea about the society. So that is the fourth point which you can talk about. Then, so here we're talking about class structure. The class structure part, you can always gauge by reading the early and later Vedic text according to Upinder Singh ma'am. Then the last part is like the next part by which you can use like cattle rearing references, then agriculture, all these slavery, etc. These all points are there in these Vedas. So references of cattle rearing, agriculture activity, it sheds important light on the socio-economic life of contemporary society. So that part. Then polytheism and Kathenotheism. So there is a lot of talk about polytheism. We know polytheism. What is polytheism? What is the basic meaning of polytheism? So we have multiple gods. We worship multiple gods. But then again, this Max Mueller, sir, he gave a concept of Kathenotheism. I've just shown you Max Mueller. He gave the concept of, sometimes he's written like this, Muller. Sometimes he's also, there's another E which is added here. So he gave the concept of Kathenotheism. What is Kathenotheism? So Kathenotheism is nothing. There are multiple gods, but during certain periods, one god will become supreme. Like when you have Diwali, so Lakshmi ji becomes supreme. When you have Saraswati Puja, Saraswati ji becomes supreme. So that is called as Kathenotheism, one god becoming supreme at certain period of time. So hope you understand what is polytheism, worshipping of multiple gods. What is Kathenotheism? One god is becoming supreme at a particular period of time. So this Rig Veda, it talks about polytheism, and they talk about so many gods, Agni, Surya, Usha, Indra, and that you can you can vouch for that. Yes, there was polytheism, which we are still practicing up until this particular date. Then these texts, they also indicate that wars were fought over possession of cattle. So all these things, what it is telling you, that if you have to construct the history of subcontinent, it is important that you carefully juxtapose. The word here is, I'm erasing all these. I will show you the handwritten notes. It is very important that you carefully juxtapose. Juxtapose means keep side by side which sources, both archaeological sources as well as text-based sources. And when you're doing that, so you have to corroborate, even with Shruti literature, you have to corroborate with archaeological sources if there are any. And caution should be made while using ancient Shruti literature as source of history. So this will be your conclusion part. Then there is another point which was talked about by Romila Thapar ma'am. Romila Thapar ma'am, very famous historian. NCRT, many books are written by Romila Thapar ma'am. She is Romila Thapar. And there was certain controversy which was recently associated with her, but she's a very, very good historian, very, very good historian. So we don't need to go into controversies. We just need to take out the good things. She's a very good, personally, I like her, but again, that's my personal, I like her personally. I like what she talks about history per se. So she has talked about these two things, embedded and externalized form of history. So embedded history means sometimes history, you have to extract. It's not explicitly there, like Shruti literature. It's not written from the point of view of historians, it's a religious literature. So here history is embedded. You have to extract out. Externalize means there are some sources which are just written to tell you about history, like Al-Baruni's and Al-Baruni's Kitabul Hind, and then there is Raj Tarangini, also Kalhans. So they are externalized form, and then there are some books written by historian per se, which are externalized form of history, where you are directly getting what you want. But sometimes histories are embedded in certain sources, like Shruti literature. So you can say Shruti literature is an embedded form of history. Hope you understand it. We'll discuss it later on as well. So now these are some points. Now let me show you what we have just discussed. So this was the question, and let me make it bigger for you so that you can see whatever you can see. My handwriting anyway, it's like a doctor. But again, we all have flaws, don't we? So this was the question: how far can ancient Indian Shruti literature be used as historical sources? So all these points you can see problems in using Vedas. This can be a first heading. They are religious literature. References are very few. Then what else? It is may not reflect popular ideas and practices. This we have discussed. Then a major problem in using Vedas as a source of history is dating the Rig Veda. This part also we have discussed, that some sources say that it was compiled during 6000 to 1000 BC. Some says that no. According to most of the historians, they now believe that 1500 to 1000 early Vedic text, which comprise only Rig Vedic Samhita, and the later 15 or the other 15 parts of 4 Vedas in later Vedic period, according to Max Mueller study. Then sometimes archaeology says something and these Vedas say something else entirely. So the second part, which we have discussed, up to what extent they can be used as historical sources. They can be used as sources for those areas where they were composed. We have discussed this. Then Battle of 10 Kings, it may have happened. Sabha and Samiti references you are finding out. Then they talk about society, which kind of society was there, different degree of access to productive resources, references of slavery, cattle rearing. We have discussed this. Polytheism. Apart from polytheism, I have also told you about Kathenotheism. Then wars were fought over cattle. And this was the conclusion. This part I was telling you, the conclusion part, that if you have to construct the history of the subcontinent, you have to corroborate both the sources. You have to have a look at both the archaeological as well as text-based evidence, and you should be exercising caution. That's it. And Romila Thapar ma'am has talked about embedded and externalized form of history. I have just given you some hint of it. We'll have a discussion on it later on as well. So now let me show you something else. Okay, just a second. Now, if you remember, I have also given you, when we were having a look at, if you see this, just a second. Yeah, here there are two questions. These two questions are also there. Ancient Indians had no test for historiography. Then discuss the changing approaches to study for early Indian history. This you will not do right now. So now I will stop making videos on sources. I will move on to topic 2, that is pre and proto history. Later on, we'll discuss these two questions, because for telling you about these questions, see, here there's a talk about early medieval India. So I have to teach you about early medieval period. Then only you can understand things. Here also changing approaches. We'll deal with it once we are done with ancient Indian history. I will make another part on sources and we will have a discussion on this. This is a homework for you right now. So next class or next video on history optional, that will be your topic 2. And then we'll move on to other areas. Revise it and make proper notes. Listen to videos multiple number of times. This will help you a lot. Take care. Be blessed. Bye-bye.